Well, hello,
Nope.
everybody. It's really good to see you here today, and we're on Facebook Live. So I hope that this is coming out loud and clear. First of all, I just want to say welcome to Dawn. Thank you so much for being here. We're having some tea talks just to have some conversations with folks in the riding. Many people have contacted our office and asked to be part of the Tea Talk. And so, just so you know, we're getting back to people as quickly as we possibly can. But this is just an opportunity. Since we're in the middle of COVID, we can't go out and do things the way we usually do. I wanted to have some conversations about key issues that matter to our community. So, last time that I did this, some folks sent a message and asked, where is the teacup, Rachel? So, Don and I both have our teacups this time. And I want to thank Stonehouse Teas. I have got some of their Campbell River blend, and I sent some over to Don so that he
Mhm.
could enjoy it. So hopefully it's there. So I'm going to introduce you and then ask you some good questions today, Don.
Sounds good.
So first of all, Don lives and works in the traditional territories of the Kwakwala speaking peoples. He is currently the member of the BC Community Poverty Reduction Initiative for the Ministry of Children and Family Development and is also the executive director for Mental Health Recovery Partners of North Island. Previously, Don worked for both ACT and ICM teams at Island Health, and he has presented at several national conferences on rural poverty and homelessness, and is an active community volunteer and sits on a number of organizational boards. And Don, really, it is the amazing work that you've done around rural and poverty and homelessness that is just been so impressive to me. So I'm so glad that you could join us here today. So thank
Hmm.
you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Yeah.
So here's my first question for you today. Can you tell me a bit about the work that you do?
So, as you could probably tell from your introduction, I wear many hats in the community. So my work, I, it's hard to describe it in a very short one sentence description. So ideally, I work on poverty issues, but at a higher level within my position with government. So I try to work with local community partners, with the municipality, with the BC government, with the federal government, and partners in terms of just forwarding issues around poverty, relating messages, especially around rural poverty. There is a huge focus on urban poverty, and
Mhm.
often that those rural issues don't necessarily or not included in conversations. So it's important that even from our initiative, that those rural issues get, I guess, noticed and talked about at the tables. My new position with Mental Health Recovery Partners is just really around delivering supports to family members, to people that suffer from mental illness. Um, and more recently, we've sort of branched out in terms of services because we really believe in sort of a whole picture approach to working with people. So combining the aspects of poverty, food insecurity, housing insecurity, and physical and mental health, and sort of doing a wraparound services. And so we're currently in receipt of the Reaching Home funding from the federal government, the Housing and Homelessness Initiative in the Mount Washington region.
Yeah,
And we're currently doing a rental subsidy program here in the region.
that's
So, I mean,
fantastic.
in a very short, sort of encapsulated kind of way, that's kind of sort of the gist of what I'm doing.
And it sounds like a lot with a lot of different hats dealing with some
Yeah,
really high needs issues that need particular attention. So I appreciate so much that that's
yeah.
the work. And I think you did a very good job of outlining the complexity of it.
Mhm.
So, one of the questions is we've been impacted, all of us, differently by COVID. And not too long ago, I heard somebody say, we're not all in the same boat. We're all in the same ocean with different boats. And some boats are really fancy and doing well, and other boats are really struggling. And I keep
Mhm.
thinking about what that means for our riding and the people who live here. So, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your work and what were the immediate impacts that you experienced due to COVID,
Mhm.
and what were the challenges that the people that you work with regularly, what were the challenges that they faced?
Okay. So I guess for myself, the immediate impacts were just a change in how we work. I was, part of my office, unfortunately, was structured in a way, was created as an open office. And I think a lot of offices over the years were moving towards these ideas of a more open type office. But in COVID, that doesn't work. So as a result, I was sent home quite early in the pandemic, and I have actually returned to work since. So I've been sort of working remotely for over a year. Um, and personally, I think initially there was kind of I don't know what you would call it, but it was kind of a refreshing change being able to work from home because I never really had that opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of, and I can only speak for myself, but I mean, it gets to a point where that routine of just working from home becomes more and more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
The isolation, and not having your colleagues to talk with, um, sort of on an ad hoc basis, seeing other faces. And I think it becomes more challenging from a mental health perspective as a worker.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of our work already is challenging from a mental health perspective in terms of just our clients and, sort of managing those boundaries and not taking on a lot of their issues because, most of the people I work with are, um, they're probably the most vulnerable people in our communities. And, and doing that in isolation as a worker, it's challenging. Um, and, and I think the challenges for the people I work with, it was just not being able to meet them in person
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. And just talking to someone on the phone is just not the same as meeting someone in person, especially for our vulnerable populations. I think, you know, and also the technology piece. A lot of the access to services are challenging for people as it is now because we've moved so much towards, applications online, um, having to go to offices to access services. And when that became unavailable, it was just, it was almost impossible for people, a lot of people to access services that they really needed. And yeah, it threw everything sort of sideways. And, even now it's challenging a year later and it's still challenging. We're still coming up against a lot of the same issues that we were just sort of, kind of thrown into the fire at the beginning and didn't really know what to do. And we're still facing those same challenges now.
Yeah, I know it's been hard, and I really appreciate your point about not everybody has this kind of technology. I remember, in my first year as a parliamentarian, actually in Ottawa, bringing in representatives from Service Canada and talking about why they needed to still provide printed material, because we were hearing from a lot of constituents, people lower income, seniors who aren't going to get on a computer, folks that are really in remote parts of the riding who just can't. They cannot go online. And I remember one senior in particular saying, I need a tax form in paper because I am not going to the library to do my taxes in front of everyone. And right now, that is not even a service that's provided. So it is
Yeah.
really hard. It is really
Yeah.
hard for people just to get those basic services.
Yeah. And for example, social assistance. The only way you can apply for social assistance in BC is online. You can't do it any other way other than online. And for a number of my clients who did not have access to technology, I would meet with them in person and do their application with them online. And with a single, living in an area where it's a remote rural area, as you know, you've been up here many times, we have a single service BC office that services the whole area with one computer. And initially that computer wasn't accessible due to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just, and that hasn't necessarily changed. I mean, that computer is accessible, but, there was no alternatives. Libraries were closed. Everything was closed where there was free access to technology. And it was just really challenging.
Yeah, and we found the same in the very beginning, especially when people were trying to figure out the different government programs, and if they could not get online, they just couldn't see
Yeah.
anything, and that was really distressing. So I guess, what I'm curious about is in the role that you play and really the multiple roles that you play, what are the most significant changes you've had to make as the pandemic continues? I think in the very beginning, a lot of us thought, okay, this is strange. We get to stay home a little bit more. Maybe that won't be so bad. But it's not ending. And we're now well over a year. And I'm just wondering you talked a little bit about it, but what are the long-term challenges of dealing with the people you serve during the pandemic, and what kind of assets or what have you learned, and is there still significant gaps?
Well, honestly, I think it this pandemic, I think, really has highlighted poverty, and I really believe it's deepened the social inequalities in the country. And I think it's been more impactful on people that were already living in poverty. And, I, in terms of just the things we need to do or the things I'm doing is trying to develop more assets in community, more supports and assets in community that are going to be long term rather than the short term assets that we're bringing or short term programming or funding. What I'm really focusing on is bringing programming that's going to be maintained and it's going to still be here to sort of answer those inequities that were already there. But now, because they've been highlighted by the pandemic, there's been opportunity as well to sort of access new funding, new COVID funding, for example, and new programming. So it's a way of, I guess, really my focus is trying to keep that programming and funding in place
Mm-hmm.
because there was a need for it prior to pandemic. We, you know, we were very fortunate to get access to it because of the pandemic. And now it's just being able to keep it after the pandemic because there's still a need.
Mm-hmm.
So, some of the things I would like to see, and I'm sure we're going to have is, I've brought backpack buddies to the community with services, kids in school, provides weekend meals. We've been able to expand that project from a pilot project to continue it, to every school. Food insecurity programs and the housing rental subsidy program I talked about. So it's just really just focusing on keeping what we have gained during pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to go back to the quote that I talked about earlier about we're all in the same ocean, but we're all in different boats. I think, one of the things I knew about it already. I mean, my background before being a
Yeah,
politician was working as a service provider and worked in Indigenous communities with
yeah,
newcomers to Canada. And you just see those gaps all the time. And it's really frustrating trying to fill it up because you know that if you can fill some of those gaps, the opportunities will grow from that. But until you can sort of figure out those basic needs, it's really hard to get people to have that vision. Because when you're busy surviving, that takes a lot of time and energy.
yeah,
That is nothing that we should ever undermine. That is a lot of work, just figuring out how you're going to make things work every day. And it was so startling in the very beginning of the pandemic to see how scared people were
yeah,
and how they just needed help so quickly to deal with the day to day. So I really appreciate what you're saying about we need to have some of these things be long term and stable and recognize that the most vulnerable paid the largest price
yeah,
and continue to pay the largest
yeah,
price during the
yeah,
pandemic.
yeah.
Yeah. So my next question for you, Don, is with all the work that you've done, would you share your thoughts on child poverty, housing, and a bit about food insecurity in communities and how they're interconnected? And I'm keeping that COVID theme alive, how they're
Yeah.
interconnected, but how has COVID also impacted it? So maybe like in the beginning, just how those things intersect anyways, but
Yeah.
what's the added pressure that COVID has added to it?
Honestly, I think the first thing we noticed, well, here specifically in Mount Washington, was the food insecurity issue. That became pretty clear at the very beginning. There was a much higher need of food and access to food in the community with the onset of the pandemic. Um, and, I mean, the correlation between the poverty and housing insecurity piece and the food insecurity, they're all interconnected. Um, we recently did, the regional district here recently did a housing needs assessment, which is a really valuable document. They did they've done a lot of really good work, but it highlighted a number of things. Um, First of all, the lack of inventory for housing here in the region. And it's, nothing has changed. It's been like that for years. But one of the other things that I'll also highlight is how many people are housing insecure. So people that pay, well over 30% or more of their total income towards rent. And, we saw many of the people that were laid off or lost jobs at the beginning of the pandemic were low income earners. And, you know, so people were having to choose. Do I keep a roof over my head, or do I feed my family? Do I keep the power on in my house? I mean, like you said, that survival piece. And those are choices that, a lot of us are very fortunate not have to make. But for most of our frontline and low income earners that were impacted immediately by losing employment, they had to make those difficult choices. And for most people, they're obviously the first choice is going to be pay their rent. So that food insecurity piece became very, very prevalent right away. So access to food banks and agencies and people looking for those food and food hampers became very noticeable. And the poverty, mental health, and physical health pieces, I think they're all interconnected. So, in terms of just stress, increased mental health issues, and then the child poverty piece, of course, children don't live independently in poverty. It's the families that live in poverty. And for our region, it's been something I've been talking about for years. Mount Waddington has one of the highest child poverty rates in BC. We're well above the provincial average. We're 1 in 3 children here live in poverty. And when I talked previously about bringing those resources and having long-term supports in place, it's the idea of breaking those cycles of generational poverty. And rural there's a different perspective of how poverty looks in a rural setting. And it's just it's something we really have to focus on, because I think we have to focus on, and I'm sure you've heard it before, these upstream solutions in terms of, especially when it comes to child poverty. When you look at child poverty, I think we have to take a different view of what we're doing as a nation or as a community. We have to look at things where we see that as investment, and what are we investing in? Well, we're investing in ending child poverty. We're investing in people, the future, and we're investing in our communities. We can't look at it as, just another expense or, another line item in the budget, right? It's an investment, and that's the way we have to look at it. It's an investment in community. So.
Yeah, it's such an important investment. And I know I've been frustrated on the federal level. We have a national housing strategy, and I have often had conversations with both the minister and the parliamentary secretary trying to explain that the housing crisis is not just in the larger urban settings. It is in rural communities, and it is real. And I've watched the last year during COVID where we've seen a lot of people be able to work remotely. And a lot of folks from larger cities are coming to our smaller communities because they want to live that lifestyle. And I'm not rejecting that. I think that's fantastic that we're having new people, hopefully with good incomes, that will be spending money in our communities. That's fantastic. The problem is our housing insecurity is still so high, and we're not seeing any of that investment that we should be seeing. And I think it's important that people understand, one of the reasons I fight for there to be a national standard of housing in this country, and to make it a human right. Like, this is something I'm very passionate. I
Yeah.
think housing should be a human right. And I know some people hear that and they think, oh, does that mean that, the federal government has to buy everybody a house? No, it
Yeah.
doesn't. What it means is the federal government has to watch what's happening. Because if you look at the statistics, you will see that over the last 35 years, two things have happened at the same time: less and less investment from both federal and provincial governments. And I have to give BC credit. They are investing a lot more than
Yeah.
was before. So that is good. But what we've seen over the last 35 years is this huge sort of downturn in investment in any kind of co-op public housing, social housing. And then at the same time, on the private sector, you've seen less and less purchasing of housing to rent. And so having housing as a human right means that the federal government has a responsibility to watch where that ball is going, so that if we do start to see a downturn in those things, they know that they need to work with people. It could mean government funding. It could be working with, private investors to see what you can do to open up those opportunities. But what we have right now is this huge crisis across Canada that is only growing, of people not having housing, and of more and more, like you said, people who are in housing, but it's very insecure, and that's extremely stressful. So when we talk about those social determinants of health, stressing out if you're going to have a home tomorrow, stressing out if you're going to pay your rent or buy the basic necessity in foods, that is not good. It's not good for the family. It's not good for the individual, and it's definitely not good for children. So
No.
I share your frustration, and I
Yeah.
know that I keep working and pushing the federal government to step up, because we need
Yeah.
to see that investment in housing.
Yeah. Can I just share one example with you? I
Absolutely.
just, I met with a mother last month, was my first connection, single mother with one child, um, and applying for rental subsidy under the program. Um, it worked out that she was actually paying 90% of her total income towards rent.
90%.
Yeah, she had $40 left after paying rent.
Yeah. And this is happening. And
Yeah.
I'm really grateful that you shared that story, because
Yeah.
we talk to people all the time that are paying over 30% of their income towards their housing. And how, I talked to a young person who just said, like, I don't even dream that I'll ever own a house. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just figuring out how many roommates I need for the rest of my life. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
this is really doing something to young people. And these are rural communities. These are not,
Yeah.
lower mainland communities. And so what does that mean for us?
Yeah.
It's pretty important.
Yeah.
So my next question for you, and I'm going to start to go on a lighter tone. We've only got 8 more minutes.
Okay.
The first one is there any changes that have happened because of COVID that you hope to maintain when the pandemic is over?
Yeah. I mean, the one that really sort of stands out for me, and I was talking to a colleague of mine earlier, is I would really like to keep, especially in the Mount Washington region, I think the ability to deliver some programming online is something we're going to keep, just because it gives more access to more people in a region this big. For example, we're going to be starting a program called Mind Teen for youth between the ages of 13. And I think the opportunity is there. I mean, youth are technology engaged, they have access to it. And I think they're maybe a little bit more comfortable accessing those types of programs online. So that's something we're going to look to keep in the future, rather than maybe moving back towards doing these in-person group type meetings. So specifically for that, I mean, and then other types of online programs, I think we can reach more people. And quite honestly, I think, expanding it even further to other communities. So I know that's something we're definitely going to keep, that we weren't necessarily doing prior to COVID. So
That's fantastic. Well, I know I've really appreciated it. I've done a couple of town halls. I mean, I'm in Campbell River right
yeah,
now, and this morning I was in the house at 7 a.m. So that time change part is fun to do that. But one of the things that I really appreciated is I was in Ottawa last year for a period of time, And I actually got to do a roundtable with a group of folks. And it was quite late for me. It was like at 10 o'clock at night because of the time change, 7 o'clock here. But I just thought, this is amazing. A year ago, I would have never thought about using Zoom as a way to do outreach with constituents. So
Yeah.
I think there are some benefits to this. I mean,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of hard things, but it's also, I think, opened our eyes to what technology can accomplish, and especially in a riding this size. Like I did some town halls just for the smaller communities because really wanted to hear from them what was happening. And it was really interesting. Some could participate fully. Some just had their mics on and their cameras off because the
Yeah.
internet wasn't strong enough. And
Yeah.
I knew that was coming, but I think it was such a good reminder of, the realities that some of our communities face.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's excellent. So
Yeah.
the last question is just a fun question about you
Yeah.
personally.
Okay.
And I like doing it because it just reminds us that we're all people. And so I'm going to ask you 3 questions.
Okay.
The first question is, what is your favorite beverage?
Okay. We're drinking tea, and I feel, really bad to say this, but my favorite beverage is actually coffee.
It's okay. The last person I interviewed also coffee, and she loves her. She has a tea shop, so it is okay.
Oh, and and I mean, I'll self-describe myself as a bit of a coffee snob, and I grew up in Victoria, so I have a very specific coffee too. Is my favorite beverage, so I love Discovery Coffee. So if anyone ever goes to Victoria, please visit Discovery Coffee. It's my favorite.
That's fantastic. So. Well, I'm a tea drinker, which is why it's Tea Talk with Rachel. Everybody makes fun of me. Yeah. And I know that when I go to Stonehouse Tea to buy a whole bunch of tea to bring to Ottawa with me, they tease me quite a lot. So, but that's okay. I accept coffee drinkers. I live with.
Okay.
Can you tell us one of your favorite books or a favorite movie that you have?
Ooh. Favorite book. I don't necessarily, I have 2 authors that are really my favorite authors. So Haruki Murakami, Japanese writer, and another writer named Karl Ove Knausgaard are probably my 2 favorites. I've read everything
that they have.
Yeah, so I can't necessarily pinpoint one of their books over another. I just love both of them. So
that's fantastic. Well, I'm a big reader too, so I got to ask.
Yeah.
And the last question that I have for you is, why do you love where you live?
Having grown up in Victoria and living most of my life there, one thing I've really come to appreciate being here on the North Island is the pace of life and the quiet. When I first moved here, it was kind of eerily quiet, but now it's more of a peaceful quiet for me, because whenever I go back to Victoria to visit, honestly, I can't stand being there for more than a day or 2. So for me, always coming back here now, it's that love of that pace, the quiet. And the other thing too is I love the people here and the culture. I've learned so much by just being here and being a settler on this territory. And it's just been an honor to be here.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Well, I often say to folks, usually, not so much now, but usually as the MP, I've spent half the year in Ottawa. And I just find, I love telling the story. It was late at night. I had just been elected maybe 4 or 5 months, and I was walking out of the House of Commons. And as I was walking, I saw a light out of the corner of my eye, and I thought, it's the ferry. And of course, there's no ferries there.
No.
But I thought, that's how much I miss it, that I'm going to see something out of the corner of my eye. And my first assumption, it's going to be a ferry. So I really miss being here. I'm really grateful to be here more often. That is one of the benefits of COVID, is I actually get to see my family a little bit more. Yeah. And I get to stay here. And I really appreciate that, because we do live in a beautiful place and with people who really care about one another. And that's something that I really really notice in
Yeah.
all of our communities. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you for doing this with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing all of that information, and thank you for the work that you continue to do for the
Yeah.
to the region. I know that you're well respected and that people appreciate deeply your
Yeah.
connection to that region. So thank you.
No, thank you. And thank you for all your work too, because, I follow you quite closely, and I think I'm one of your favorites. Like that post came up saying you're one of Rachel Blaney's favorite followers.
Well, I appreciate it. It
Yeah.
means a
I,
lot to me.
yeah.
And
So,
so next week I will be here again. We're going to have Darlana coming to meet with us. Darlana is from Powell River, and she will be here with us on Saturday. Actually, we're going to be doing it on a Saturday, so on the 24th, and we're going to be talking about the program that she works on, Mom Stop the Harm, and about opioids and what's happening, and the real realities that families are facing. So I'm really looking forward to having that honest conversation. So thank you. This will be on Facebook. It's on Facebook Live, and we'll make sure that it's on YouTube as well, so you can share it with all your friends. So you have a great day, and
yes.
goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much for coming out, and we will talk to you again next week. Bye, everyone.